everybody. Thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate you being here. We know there are lots of sessions to choose from and lots of different hallways to go down, so we're grateful that you ended up at the end of our hallway. My name is Brendan Getz. I'm the data manager at the University of Colorado, Denver, Anschutz Medical Campus. I work in the IT department in the Academic Technology and CU Online division.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Treadwell. I work with Interworks. I have been a consultant with UC Denver for the last year and a half. Brendan's going to talk a lot about the work that I got to do there, the data engineering work, Tableau dashboard and Tableau dashboard design work, and I'll be up here at the end to answer any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
So why are you here? Why are you at the conference? I think a lot of us are here because we're trying to change something. You know, you go to the keynote in the morning and there's a lot of excitement about making change. Maybe you're here to check out some hands-on lab sessions so you can develop your desktop skills to build more compelling dashboards. Maybe you're checking out clients who are using Server so you can figure out how to implement or scale your server. And maybe you're trying to figure out how some people have made change in their organization. And if that's the case, you've come to the right place. That's our story today. We're going to get into some of the more technical tips and tricks, some cool calculated fields, parameters, things like that. But our real story is in how we were able to use Tableau in a proof of concept at the University of Colorado, Denver, just starting within the CU Online division, and really catalyze a grassroots effort that led to a bigger business intelligence initiative on campus and has us rapidly scaling out our desktop and server usage. So how did we get involved? I knew this was going to happen. I'm just going to switch these out real fast. Oh, I know what's going on. There we go. We had it all set up, and then we waited for like 30 minutes, and then things shut off. So get to how we got involved in a moment, but this is what you're going to learn in the next 45 minutes or so. You're going to learn about the challenges that we were facing. I suspect that they're somewhat similar to some of the challenges that you're facing, so hopefully there's some room to identify there. I think it's really important to understand the context that we were working in so you can identify and see how it's similar or different to your organization and take some of the lessons that we learned and apply them to your situation. You'll learn about our stated goal and how it was really a little bit of a ploy to do a lot more than we were stating and achieve way more than what we said we were doing. I just started at the university and so was able to dive into looking at our data structure with really fresh eyes, and not surprisingly, we have some issues. Maybe you do too. So we'll share a little bit about how we handled those. And then we'll share about why we chose to go with a proof of concept instead of setting up a production level project right off the bat that had some implications and sort of had us going down different paths depending on what we chose to do. We'll talk about the tips and tricks. There were some technical pieces to this, even though it's kind of a very socio-political story. There were some technical aspects that we had to iron out to really build a compelling proof of concept. So we'll share some of the technical takeaways from that. And then, of course, we'll tell you where we ended up now. Spoiler alert, we're in a pretty good place, so hopefully this is worth your time. So how did we in CU Online get involved with making this change at the university? We're in the IT department, but our team is primarily responsible for administering our learning management system, which is Canvas, and supporting course and program development in the online realm. We're not historically a reporting body on campus. We're not one of the groups that's doing a lot of analysis. We had some of our side things, but it wasn't in our wheelhouse, I suppose, in the public realm. But we had been hearing a lot of chatter from folks on campus around dissatisfaction with our existing infrastructure, challenges around the cadence at which data was being delivered. It's going out too slowly. Challenges around the manner in which it was being presented. It wasn't very interactive. It wasn't easy to get at row-level data. Maybe you've heard some of these in your organization. And so we just kind of stepped up to handle this. And we started with the Dean's Dashboard project in February of 2016. And what do you think a dean wants to see at a university? A lot of things, but enrollment is one of those top pieces of information that's really important for a dean. And really important for the university. You know, a lot of schools and colleges and universities live and die by enrollment. We have to make a lot of decisions around what those enrollment figures look like, make changes, and so on and so forth. And deans were getting enrollment information in static 40-page PDFs. So you can imagine that that's maybe not the easiest way to consume this information. And so nobody was really stepping up to do anything, and so we were just kind of like, all right, we'll tackle this. And this is what we were up against. It was a mess. It really was a nightmare. You know, people were going in all different kinds of directions. There was not a unified direction that anybody was going in. You had folks like data analysts grabbing their stuff and saying, screw it, I'm going to do my own thing, building my own data warehouse. You have leadership standing around and talking about stuff, which we absolutely need. I'm not trying to badmouth leadership, but we need people on the ground to get things done. And then, of course, you've got the frustrated guy in the white car who's like, maybe if I just give this person in front of me a nudge, that'll get us going in the right direction. That might have been me. So the first thing that we had to tackle, and that was really the most prominent when it came to recognizing that we needed better ways to view and share data, was our existing reports. And this is what it looked like. This is an example of something that a dean would receive. It's an enrollment report. It's a 40-page static PDF, aggregated data. And we as a university had developed a lot of very organic solutions to meet specific needs over the years within the constraints of the university. And so when things like this were being developed, we didn't have a widely adopted, easily scalable or shareable BI tool. We had some internal and external reporting needs. We had concerns around row-level security. We didn't necessarily want people getting at the row-level data. So this made sense. You can't get at row-level data in an aggregated static PDF. And you can also email it to people inside the university and outside the university, or publish it on a website. But do you think a dean wants to look at this? Do you want to look at this? It's not great. So what we were hoping to do with this proof of concept was to start moving away from things like this into things like this, which is an example of early Tableau usage at the university. It's a national survey of student engagement dashboard. Nothing specific about this dashboard that I wanted to point out, just share that this was early adoption, and it's a lot easier to look at something like this compared to something like this. So we have this. It's just looking at how many of our students have to provide care for dependents and how much time. So we're trying to move away from those PDFs into things like this, and ultimately this, which is the dean's dashboard. This was the thing that really, this was our proof of concept. It was the thing that kicked off what we were trying to do. Interworks built this for us. It is obviously built in Tableau. It's wrapped in a custom portal that Interworks built, and you can see that it's really nice to look at. So imagine either yourself now, or imagine that you're a dean and you want to get enrollment information. Would you rather those PDFs, or would you rather something like this? So that was the first really prominent thing that we were facing. The other big piece of the university environment is the siloed nature of it. Our IT department works in service of both campuses. We have the downtown Denver campus. We also have the Anschutz medical campus out in Aurora. And we have CU Denver South also, which is another one of our campuses. So we already right there have 3 different campuses. We have medical research going on. We have healthcare going on out at the Anschutz Medical Campus. Obviously, we're very concerned with student success and education being a university. We have the Office of Institutional Research, Office of Analytics for Enrollment and Retention, the IT department, the Budget and Finance department, 13 schools and colleges. You get the picture that there are a lot of different factions to what's going on, and historically we didn't communicate very well. So a really big part of this project for us was opening up those siloed doors, because having those closed is what leads to traffic jams like this. Another layer to that siloed nature of the university is the role that the system office plays. So we have legally 3 institutions. There's University of Colorado Denver, which is downtown and AMC. There's University of Colorado Boulder. Any Buffs fans, football fans here? That's what most people think of when they think of the University of Colorado, is CU Boulder. And then we have University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And then we have the University of Colorado System Office, which kind of floats among them and provides some shared services to the 3 universities, but they don't provide everything. So one thing that they do provide is our Oracle PeopleSoft implementation. That's where our student information systems data lives, as well as finance data and HR data, and maybe a couple others, but those are the big ones. They support Cognos, which is the official reporting tool for the university system. And then Cognos is a window into the central information warehouse, which is a type of data warehouse that the system office built. And again, like those PDFs, that data warehouse was built with a very specific need in mind. It was meant to be a warehouse that would allow us to report on the system of record. It doesn't take snapshots, for example, so we can't look at last week's data. We can only see what's most recent. And so kind of what happened with that is that it really impacted the data pipeline at the university. That type of warehouse doesn't meet the needs of most folks at the university. And so offices like institutional research needed to build their own data warehouse because they have a need to be able to report not only on last week's data, but say what does last week of fall 2017 look like compared to that week in fall 2016. So our data pipeline is already broken at that piece. At that point, there were other rogue data warehouses popping up around campus. And then there are also a lot of data sources that just weren't being utilized very well. I mentioned our student information systems data, our finance data, and our HR data, all in that PeopleSoft implementation. But we have CRMs around campus. We don't have one CRM, we have many CRMs. We have lots of folks using Qualtrics to collect survey data. We have faculty course questionnaire data that comes at the end of each course. We have our learning management system data. We have advising data where advisors are taking notes after meeting with students. I can go on and on and on. But our data pipeline was broken because we weren't getting our needs met on one level, and then we just have all these different data sources all over the place. So in terms of handling that in this project, we opted to focus just on a single data source because we are going with the proof of concept. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but with all of this in mind, we really have to remember what the pace of change is at the university. And how do you think things move here? Just like this traffic jam. It's slow. You're not going anywhere fast. And in case you forgot, you've got the data analyst leadership, not just one frustrated guy, but many frustrated people all over the university. So this kind of sets the context that we're working in. And I think it is helpful to keep in mind as we move into talking a little bit more about why we opted to do a proof of concept instead of going with a whole production level project, because you can imagine that if we were to try and put together a whole production level project, how long do you think it would take? I wouldn't be presenting about this right now. It would be years. Maybe Tableau like 2025. So how did, I guess like where did we start when we're like, we have all these things going on. How can we start making this change? This is where my boss, David Thomas, comes into play. David's the director of academic technology and CU Online. And I mentioned that we weren't historically the folks to be doing reporting and analysis on campus. And David probably wasn't the first person to see that things needed to change, but it seemed like David was one of the first people to actually take action. And so he brought me on board in January of 2016, so almost 2 years ago right now. And I am the only data person on our team, and we're about to undertake a pretty big project. We're not looking to just stay within the scope of our 10 or 12 person team. We're really looking to have an impact on the university as a whole. You know, several thousand people, 2 or 3 campuses, lots of different schools and colleges. So we needed some more experience and expertise to really get this thing going. And that's where Interworks came into play. David was at the Tableau conference 2 years ago and saw Kate present with Princeton University on the work that they were doing in their advancement office and felt like they would be able to integrate well into our environment. You know, think about your own organizations, your own industries. There's probably a certain language that's used, a certain way of going about things, and if somebody from the outside comes in and doesn't seamlessly integrate into that, how do you think it's going to go? It might not go too well. So when David saw Kate and Interworks and the work they were doing at another university, it kind of clicked that that would be what we needed to get our situation off the ground. So what was it that we were actually trying to do? What was our goal? For us, this was really an iceberg project. The dean's dashboard was the tip, what you saw just a moment ago. And what we really wanted to do is get people thinking about everything below the surface. You know, these dashboards are great. They help people make decisions. They can even be nice to look at sometimes, but they're only as good as the data that's feeding them. And so we hoped that by showing people something very compelling at the tip of the iceberg, you know, a new way to view and share data, that it would get people thinking about everything below. And that's where our business intelligence initiative comes in, is that we had a lot of different things to get in order for us to be a more sort of forward-thinking, analytics-driven, data-informed organization. And so we knew that if we started with this whole big chunk at the bottom, that it probably wouldn't move very quickly, and we needed to get something in front of people right away because there was already a lot of disillusionment on campus. And so even though we really wanted to focus more on the bottom half of this, we needed to show just a little bit at the top to get people thinking about the bottom. So that's where we were going with this. So how did we actually get moving once we came up with this strategy? Wireframing and agile development. This is at the beginning of when Kate and I started working together. So I mentioned I started in January of 2016, and this project started in February of 2016, like literally weeks before after I started. And before we even dug into Tableau and dug into the data, Kate and I spent almost a full week on a listening tour of sorts. We were meeting with anybody that we could talk to and anybody that we could listen to figure out what needed to happen at the university. We were meeting with associate deans, with leadership from the system level. We were meeting with other data groups on campus, institutional research, Office of Analytics and for Enrollment and Retention. And after that, we started bouncing ideas back and forth on 8.5 by 11 computer printer paper with Post-it notes and Sharpies. Because we knew that before we even looked at the data and opened up Tableau, that we kind of had to get going in the right direction and think about what it was that we were going to build that could get people thinking, not just about the tip of the iceberg, but thinking about what else we could do with everything else that we need to do at the university to get more great things at the tip of that. So, yeah. There were a lot of really good ideas that ended up on here. There was one good idea that's not up there, though. Those sideburns, they were a poor decision that didn't last very long. They did last long enough to end up in pretty much every photo from last summer, though, so you'll see them somewhere. So this is the Dean's dashboard, again, in case you forgot. This is the tip of the iceberg, and this is what Interworks had a pretty big hand in building and helping us get off the ground. So just to walk through what we have going on here. After meeting with those folks for a week, we kind of established some user needs, and we're like, all right, let's get something out there right away. And we had a lot of different things that people wanted. Do you ever build something and people are like, oh yeah, can you add this filter and then bring in this other data source? And oh yeah, can you do this one other thing? This project was no different. So we tried to accommodate as much as we could and keep a really clean looking dashboard. And we did that by using parameters pretty heavily at the top. So you can see that we're toggling between term and that most of those sheets change, except that bar chart in the top left, that's our growth sheet. And that allows us to view our time data in two different ways. So by just changing the parameter. With the term, we can look at current year versus previous year and see how they compare, but we can also keep all the years in the view. We have our KPIs, our key performance indicators, in those 4 donuts up at the top. Those values will change as we change the term, but as we change the metric, for example, all those donut charts stay the same and the rest of the bar charts change. And then you'll notice that as we go change this metric here, we're looking at course enrollments, and now all of the bar charts change to show course enrollments instead of fill rate, which is what it was on before. So our data and the data structure is obviously what is behind all of that. And even with a lot of different problems, we were still able to build something that was pretty compelling. And so we wanted to give you a few takeaways here and talk about some of the issues we were facing. Maybe you're facing some of the same challenges, and then we'll talk about how we handled them. So the Office of Institutional Research was really helpful in us building this dashboard and this project. I had mentioned that the CIW, the Central Information Warehouse at the system level, didn't quite meet the needs of a lot of folks on campus because it's only the most recent point in time. We had the same issue, and so going back to that siloed issue, all these issues, going back to the silo situation, we built this relationship with the Office of Institutional Research, and they ended up providing the data source for this, which was their Microsoft SQL Server instance that they historically hadn't really shared with too many people. They had to build this data warehouse for their own needs, and it was kind of their source. But in trying to clean up the data pipeline at the university and trying to open up the silo doors, we were able to really build a good relationship with them that led them to giving us not full access to the database, but at least views into the tables that we needed. And there were 2 main tables that we needed here. On the left, you can see that the class view is highlighted in gray. That really was our primary data source, and that is all class level information. So there's at least 1 row, sometimes more rows per class with information like the class name, what department it's tied to, who the instructor is, when it meets, things like that. And then on the right is the other view. That data source that's highlighted in gray, class enroll, is a student level data source. So that's 1 row of data roughly for every enrollment action that a student takes. So when a student adds a course, we get a row of data that says what the course is, who's the student, what's some demographic information about them, what's their major, things like that. And then when they drop a course, we get another row that, oh, this course was dropped, and so on and so forth. So we have these 2 different data sources at 2 different levels of granularity, the class level and the student level. Fortunately, we have some common dimensions in both that are helpful in dealing with this down the line. We're also facing some duplication issues, or in this case, triplication. So this is an example of 3 rows of data all from the same course. But the 3 rows are showing up because there might be different primary instructors. Maybe there are 3 primary instructors for this course, so we get 1 row for each one of those. Maybe the meeting pattern changes. So for the first semester, it meets on Tuesdays from 6 to 10 p.m. And the second part of the semester, it meets on Thursdays from 6 to 10 p.m. Those are just a couple examples of how we can end up with some of these duplication issues. But you can see it has an impact if we're looking to calculate the enrollment capacity, for example. The enrollment capacity for this class, remember all three of these rows are a single class. The enrollment capacity is 45. But if I just sum the enrollment capacity in Tableau, what am I going to get? 135. That's not what we want. So just something we have to keep in mind, that some of these records are duplicated or triplicated or more cated. Anybody have data quality issues? Nobody, right? Of course we do. Similar situation here. This time we have, these are all different classes. So, there's a row for each different class. But you can see the enrollment capacity for these classes is 999. And I can tell you that we don't have any classes that are that big. So what's going on here, we figured out, is that people are entering this kind of data in the course management system. So these are folks on the ground who are very important because they're the folks putting data into our source systems. But rather than saying there is no capacity for this class, they're saying let's just call it 999. Other departments might call it 200. We didn't really know where to draw the line, but we were pretty sure that 999 was meant no capacity. So that was another thing that we had to deal with. And again, we're doing this all in a proof of concept. And a proof of concept versus a production level project is just something quick and dirty to get it out fast and show the power and potential of, for us in this case, the new way of viewing and sharing data. So if you think about yourself, think about if someone was trying to convince you of something, what would be more convincing for you? Would it be if you had this 10-page paper document handed to you with lots of paragraphs about how great a new data strategy could be and maybe how a new tool would look really nice if we actually did it? Or would you be more convinced if you actually saw the new way of sharing and consuming data? In most cases, it's the latter. And so in order to actually show people the new way of sharing and consuming data, we got to get something out there quickly. And so we have to go with the proof of concept. And rather than dealing with some of these issues at their source systems, we just handled them in the fly in Tableau. So looking at that most recent issue that we were facing with the enrollment capacities being not sound, we opted to just handle this in the fly in Tableau, create a calculated field, and exclude some of those courses. So we have an if statement that says if the course capacity or the enrollment capacity is 998 or greater, or that course is a certain type of course that happens off campus, so you succeed, we're just going to exclude it. We'll call it null. Otherwise, we'll look at the enrollment total. And this is a really good example of how we handled it quickly on the fly in Tableau, but by opening the silo doors and starting to communicate better with these offices around campus, we learned that we weren't the only people dealing with this particular issue. So we solved it this way quickly, but then started to generate some more conversation about the best way to look at handling courses like this and really work towards documenting that instead of just having it live in people's heads, which is what had been happening so far. I wish we only had one quality issue, but we have at least two. This one is that we did not have a date field, a traditional date field that was associated with each term. What we have is a string, a text string associated with each term. So spring 2013 UC Denver is sort of what's in the data to say this is spring 2013. But we wanted to be able to do those previous year and current year comparisons like we saw on the dashboard, and also be able to look at the percentage change from year to year. So in order to do things like that, we need an actual date field because it makes it way easier to compare dates than to compare string values. So to handle it, again, we just did this in the fly in Tableau, created another calculated field. We're using a case statement that says when the term long description value is, for example, spring 2013 in UC Denver, then let's call that April 1st, 2013, and make that a date. And so each one of these date values on the right is tied to a corresponding term. And so all this April 1st dates are the spring term, all the July 1st is summer term, and those September 1st dates are fall. And then it's just the year that's different. So we would love to do this in the database, in the source system, or in our data warehouse. But again, we have read-only access to these views in the institutional research data warehouse, and so we had to handle it here in this case. But it's a really good example of the power of doing a proof of concept, getting it done quickly, but starting to come up with a list of, okay, if we're moving to a production level process, what are some of the things that we're gonna need to work on? We're gonna need to maybe get some date fields in our data warehouse, and we're gonna have to go back and deal with things like this rather than handling them on the fly in Tableau. Because if we can, we'd love to have Tableau focus on other things. We talked about granularity a little bit. Here's an example of how we wanted to look at student level data, even though the class level data was our primary data source. So if you look at the top left, the data source with the blue check mark is the class table, and that's our primary data source. And you can tell on the orange data, the data source with the orange check mark, that's our secondary data source. And what we're trying to do here is get enrollment headcount, which is a student level measure. How many unique students do we have at the university? But we have our primary data source set at the class level because most of what we need is class level information. So in order to handle this, we have more calculated fields that are gonna lead us to data blending, which is taking data from a secondary source, aggregating it, and bringing it into the view at the primary data source level on a common dimension. So to get that going, we start in our secondary data source. You can see highlighted in red, class enroll, and we take a count distinct of the person ID, which is a dimension in that data source. And so that gives us a count distinct of all of them. And now we move over into the primary data source. You can see the red ones highlighted at the top and the lower left, also the class data source. And all we're doing is pulling this head count field into the primary data source. And then what we're able to do in this view is we've got academic career on rows. And so that's things like dentistry department or doctor of physical therapy, graduate, medicine, undergraduate, and so on. And then we pull enrollment headcount blend, which is this field down here. We pull that into the text icon, and it grabs that aggregate level at the student data source and brings it up into the class data source. We'll have a Q&A at the end if anybody has questions about this. We had a few design challenges that we were facing, which was that our users wanted to be able to look at data in a few different ways, not surprisingly. One of those different ways was our time data. So we looked at that bar chart on the upper left. There was the growth sheet that showed all of the terms going back to, I think, 2012 or 2013. And so that's everything for those terms, regardless of what term is selected in the term parameter. But we also wanted to be able to show some more focused views where we're just looking at a single term that's selected in the term parameter and compare that to the previous term. So to solve that issue, we again created more calculated fields. And we have two examples here. This is our base measure, which is using the choose measure parameter. That's where the user is able to change the metric from fill rate to course enrollments or one of our other metrics. And then it's pulling in these different measures. And so this is going to display all the terms, regardless of what's selected in the parameter. But then to deal with the situation where we just want to look at one term, we created a current year measure. And there's some blending going on. And then we also have another calculated field similar to this one that's for the previous year. And so you can see that we're using the same parameter as in the top one, that choose measure parameter in purple. And then it brings in different fields depending on what term is selected. So we have some specific current year calculated fields that we made that aren't showing right now. And then for the general ones where we didn't have to, or general measures, where we didn't have to make new calculated fields, we have a nested case statement where we're pulling in the term parameter. So just an example again of how we're using calculated fields to be able to display information in a couple different ways. We also relied pretty heavily on parameters, which are all of those guys at the top there that we're toggling with right now. And so I'd mentioned we just kind of looked at an example of current year versus previous year. If we would have used a filter, we wouldn't have been able to have that current year, previous year option available, because what we would have been doing when the user wanted to look at, say, just spring 2014 data, and if we were filtering down to spring 2014, that would take all of the other data out of the view. And so you can't compare a previous year, or you can't get a % change from a previous year if the data is not there. So by using a parameter instead of a filter, we were able to keep all the data, but just say, show us only the term that's selected. We were also able to have a bunch of different metrics. So you can see that as it goes back and forth, we're switching between course enrollments, we're switching between fill rate. There are a couple others on there. One way we could have handled this was to build different dashboards, because these are all different measures. So we could have had a dashboard that was the fill rate dashboard, another dashboard that was the course enrollments dashboard, a third dashboard that was the student credit hours dashboard. And then you can see on these dashboards there are 5 sheets. So all of a sudden we're getting up to 15 sheets or more. And so by using a parameter here, we're able to keep our work down. So we only have a single dashboard in this case. And it allows the user really easily to switch between whichever metric they want to look at, and they don't have to switch between dashboards. So there were also a few tips and tricks that just kind of randomly popped up that we wanted to share. All of those were kind of an attempt to explain how we handled some of those more technical issues that we were facing, and how it got back to some of those issues that we brought up in the State of the Union, where we're looking at siloing, and how we really built relationships to deal with that. And those relationships led to us cleaning up our data pipeline, which was great because guess what? We were one of the people that had a rogue data warehouse, and we're doing some shadow IT. And ideally, we would rather not do that. It would be great if we had fewer people having data warehouses on campus. So what that allowed us to do is to move toward that single source of truth, which I studied philosophy in undergrad, and I can tell you that that's never going to happen. And if you're at the keynote this morning, Adam Solipsky will tell you that it's not going to happen either. So that's great to hear. But we would love to have as few data warehouses on campus as possible. So that was all of those things, but we just wanted to blast through a few tips and tricks here to give you some technical takeaways. This one's looking at how we were doing that current year versus previous year calculation. So just to walk through what's going on, we've got term date on rows. That's showing up here on the left. Measure names in columns. Measure values on text. And we're pulling in current year taken unit and previous year taken unit. And then in the lower left, the term spring 2014 is selected. So it's working as we hope it would. The only term that's showing data for current year is our 2014, spring 2014 date. And then what's 1 year before spring 2014? Spring 2013. And it's only showing spring 2013. So it's not showing anything else in there. How did we do that? I already walked you through these. Guess what? More calculated fields. Current year taken unit is pretty straightforward, just another case statement. So we're saying when the date of the term parameter is equivalent to the term date, which is a field in our data, then give us student credit hours. Otherwise, make it null. And so in this case, the term date, again, in the lower left is spring 2014. So that's what's going on in the purple parameter. and then the term date, 2014. So that's why that's the only one that's showing. And everything else is null. Great. Previous year is very similar with a little added complexity. We're doing the same thing with the term parameter again, saying look at the date of the term parameter. But now what we're doing is saying when the term date plus 1 is equal to the term selected, then give us student credit hours. So what year plus 1 is going to give us 2014, 2013? So when this is 2014, 2013 plus 1, let's grab the student credit hours. So that's why that's the only one that shows up. There's a lot of information that people are keeping in their heads at the university, and we're trying to get that out onto paper. So we use this little tooltip trick to articulate some of our data definitions and our assumptions. So in the top left, this is just a sheet that we brought in a custom shape. That question mark is a custom shape. And then we edited the tooltip for the sheet. And this is all the information that's in there. So this is just a way for us to communicate some of the assumptions that we're baking into our dashboards to our end user. So when somebody's like, what does course enrollment mean again? Or how is that different from head count or student credit hours? Hopefully they hover over the icon and then can get that question answered for them. And you'll see that there's a lot of text in the top here, these two big paragraphs. And tooltips can get kind of wonky when you start putting a lot of text in there. So to handle that, we actually created another calculated field. I should have just called this session calculated fields. And so when we were editing, this is the editing view of the tooltip. Rather than typing out all the information like we did for the rest, we had to type out that information or that text in a new field and then bring that field in that using the dashboard field. So it's just a little workaround to write a lot of stuff. You'll see if we hover over those KPIs that they disappear, and that's because of how the donut charts were built, and it looks great, but we don't want those to disappear. And so a really simple thing we did here was just drag a blank object over it. And now when you hover or click over those, that blank object is actually on top. So it's not having any impact on the underlying donut chart. And it's totally transparent to the user. And then the last sort of tip, I suppose, is that we, again, are trying to do a proof of concept. We're trying to get a compelling dashboard in front of people as quickly as we can to show people that there's a better way to view and consume data. And so to do that, we were sharing these via Tableau Server. And this is fine. This is the default Tableau Server user interface. And we're using it today. We have 26 projects going. But for the Dean's Dashboard project, really to get the most wow factor that we could get, we went with that custom portal that we looked at earlier. And you can see that it's just a little cleaner. It's a little sleeker. It's branded with our University of Colorado colors. This is the first thing that a user sees when they log into this. Web URL instead of our other URL. So it pops up, it's right there. There's easy navigation on the left. We actually have 3 layers of the Dean's Dashboard. There's a university level, a school or college level, and a subject level. So we've got those 3 on here, and we threw a few different dashboards on there. There's a collapsing parameter or filter menu on the right-hand side. So you can get that out of the way if you don't want to look at it, pull it back when you need to change the term or the metric. And this was great. Interworks built it using the Tableau APIs, and there's a content management system behind it. So it's really easy for me to go in and add or remove dashboards and then tie the parameters or filters in the dashboard to the portal. So did any of this work? It did. I said at the beginning, we're at a pretty good place, and that's the truth. We started with that. You saw that we started to build some other dashboards in Tableau. That National Survey of Student Engagement Data Dashboard was just one example. The Office of Institutional Research and the Office of Analytics for Enrollment and Retention have been collaborating more to get some of our enrollment dashboards out of PDF and into Tableau. And because we were able to scale up our server, they've been able to publish those more widely, which has really catalyzed the pace of change for us. And so that was really key. We started with a 20-seat server just to start sharing the Dean's Dashboard 2 years ago. We pretty quickly had to get up to a 40-seat server by the fall. I think we started working in February of 2016. We sort of unveiled this around September of 2016. And so by September, we had to scale up to a 40-seat server license. And then within the last year, we got onto an 8-core license. And so we were really able to gain those resources that we needed to pay for an 8-core license instead of a 20-seat server license, because people saw the tip of that iceberg. They saw the Dean's Dashboard. And what do you think the CFO said when she saw the Dean's Dashboard? She said, "Can we get finance data in there?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure. But we're going to need some more resources so we can, build a data warehouse, share it with people, things like that." So we're moving in the right direction with the server. We have a CU Denver Tableau user group. We have a CU Denver Data Slack workspace, and those have been some things that we implemented just to get people communicating more, to open up those silo doors. Sometimes people even walk out of the silos and talk to each other. We have a weekly report collaborators meeting, which didn't exist before. And so that's where folks like myself, some representatives from IR, Office of Analytics, Budget, Finance, somebody from HR came the other day. So it's been a great space for us to do those things. One thing that we're still working on is that data source piece. That's been sort of our biggest challenge, I suppose, is that we haven't cleaned up the data pipeline, I suppose. And so we're starting to look at some other tools for building a data warehouse on campus, because we don't have an enterprise data warehouse, and maybe we don't need a single enterprise data warehouse, but I think we need something that's going to serve the needs of a lot of people. Because what we're all doing right now, not all of us, but a lot of us are downloading text files from Cognos and bringing those into some other tool or another data warehouse. So we kind of want to cut out that middle stuff. So we started evaluating some other tools. We have our learning management system data in a Redshift instance. And it works great in most cases, but you can see that I just double-clicked on number of records here in the bottom left. And it takes a little while to load. This is hosted by Instructure, which is the company that makes Canvas, our learning management system. And it just took 15 or so seconds to bring that table up. And it's a pretty simple query. So you can imagine that it starts to take longer and longer, minutes, or it doesn't load as the queries get more complex. And we're maybe wanting to bring a few more dimensions and measures into the view. So this is where we got some great help again from Interworks. And they said, hey, there's this new database technology out there, Exasol, let's check it out. Loaded our data in there, double-clicked on number of records, and it was almost instantaneous. So we've started to go down this path and bring in some of our marketing data into Exasol, and have been pretty happy with it so far. If you want to see them side by side, you can see that Exasol loaded already. And we can wait if you want to start thinking of your questions. But again, not to bash on Redshift, it's great for some things, but this data set, or this table, has a little over 2 billion rows in it, and we just don't want to wait for that. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the work that we did, there's a case study available on the Interworks website. There's a bit.ly link, it's bit.ly/CU Denver-Interworks. And then there are a few other sessions that we thought might be helpful if you want to learn more about Interworks or Tableau Server. Tomorrow, Matt Hughes is speaking at 1:30. He's doing an admin's guide to Tableau Server Nirvana. And we talked a lot about calculated fields and parameters, so I threw a couple up here. There are tons of sessions out there. So these are just two that looked open still when I checked the other day, but tomorrow at 11:45, there's parameters, a love story. And if you have nothing to do after this one and you want to learn more about calculated fields, at 3:30 over in the south. welcome trust is doing calculations and functions for the non-programmer. So Kate's gonna come back up. Here's our contact information. Reach out to us if you have questions. We'll stick around and talk. We have microphones, Ernie, that are gonna come out because we have to turn off the lavalier mics. And then, so if you have questions, well, maybe you can come up there or we'll walk a mic around to you or something like that.
Yeah, mine's on. Turn it off? I don't know. Yeah, that's good. Oh, I just figured it out.
Well, I'll walk this guy around. We're recording the session, so it's helpful if you can use the mic. Otherwise, we can repeat the question.
Yes. Hold on. Use this one. She's number one. She's going to turn hers on.
Are you doing anything with accountability? Because sometimes things are new and sparkly and everyone's like, oh, this is so cool and we'll use it. And then you look at the usage hits and it drops off drastically. So do you have any buy-in, accountability to help reinforce the usage of these dashboards?
Yeah, it's happening somewhat naturally in that people are wanting to build more and share more in Tableau. We have moved the responsibility of managing the server out of our team and over into the group in the IT department that traditionally manages like user-facing software tools. I'm still working really closely with them, but we're trying to get some education and training related to using Tableau, both desktop, so people who get desktop licenses can share, and then server for all the publishers to learn about the permissioning structure. That's not the question? From the end user standpoint? Like is the provost saying use this in your summary to other, like to the deans, for example? I don't know. So to be honest, like the dean's dashboard got some things going and we actually, us being not the primary reporting groups, institutional research generally is for enrollment related stuff. And so they built another dashboard once we were able to open things up and folks like the provost and chancellor, associate chancellors and so on are moving folks to say, hey, go look at that. So I do keep an eye on views there. Like it's up. There are like far and away that enrollment dashboard is the one that's getting viewed the most.
We've got about 8 minutes. So.
Okay.
What did you use to build that Dean's dashboard in terms of content management? What's your content management system, and was it done in Java? Was it?
Oh, you're talking about for the portal?
Yeah.
We rolled our own content management system. I think, right, Brian? We have a gentleman in here that works with Interworks and knows it pretty well.
The code base is in PHP, but it's a product.
Yeah. Yeah. We can demo it at the booth, come by, say hi. But yeah, we roll our own, so it's our own content management system. We've used things like Drupal in the past and found it wasn't very effective and really friendly to our end users. And I'll tell you, like, I do some Python programming, but I'm not a programmer, I'm not a JavaScript programmer, and I can even do it. Like, I do it for our internal dashboards. We have our own portal at Interworks, and it's literally just a matter of copying and pasting that share URL that you get on server into, like, our back end. It's really easy.
I was just curious if you're using the guest account yet that comes with the core server, and if you have plans to, put things out to the public.
We're not using the guest account yet. Remember the traffic jam and the pace of change? It's sort of on the radar as something to talk about. We do have that need where some folks need to publish externally. We don't have like outside of the university. So right now our server's on-prem behind all our firewalls, so you can only access it if you're on the campus network or connected to VPN. So we do have some folks who need to access it that maybe aren't University of Colorado users. So it's on the radar, but we just haven't dealt with that. We've been instead publishing to Tableau Public for anything that is like truly public facing, where we don't, maybe where we don't need to know specifically who's accessing it. What the question was,
Then do you just iframe that in your website, the Tableau Public, like with embed code?
Yeah, are you guys doing any? I'm looking at somebody else I work with. No, I don't think we're really embedding much. There's the portal, which is a whole different thing. On the university websites, we're not really embedding anything. You could, I've done it before. But I think we're just directing people, like with institutional research, for example, we say go to whatever, public.tableau.com/UDen for institutional research.
Let me get some people on this side of the room. Okay. I think we had a couple people on this side of the room too. I don't want to just take it. Sure.
So I guess this is a question both for specifically University of Colorado and then just other experiences with Interworks. What's kind of the documentation process for gathering the requirements, what you're trying to capture in the reports, and before you start the work, or is there no process at all with the clients that you're working with?
Brendan, do you want to answer for CU, and I can kind of chime in a little bit?
For CU, our documentation process is not formal in any means. I mean, we just talked to people and had a Google Doc going. I think that's one area where we are still struggling a lot as a university, both in terms of listening to our users to think about what they want, as well as sort of that data governance piece. So we try and bake what we can into the dashboards, but we don't have, we don't have like a great metadata management system. We don't have a data dictionary yet. So we're really just like doing things in Excel or Google Sheets or Google Docs to handle some of those things.
So we have two kind of ways that we do it. One is if a client that we're at has a specific way they want to do requirements gathering and documentation, we use that. If there's not already one in place, we actually have a template for Teamwork Project that we use that actually has like requirements gathering information, like reporting that we built, like burn down reporting, things like that of like how we want to work with that specific client. So we actually have templates that we use.
Do you find that there's that you need it? Like I guess what I'm asking is like the level of success you see in the reports. Do you feel like that contributes a lot to the whole process?
So the question was, do we feel like we need it? Sometimes. I mean, it depends on the client, right? Like, I think everybody's a little bit different. A lot of the times when I work with universities or government entities, there's a very stringent process in terms of Dev, Prod, QA, and we really need that documentation. And some startups, like I just moved to Denver from San Francisco, and a lot of those companies are just super laid back and don't really need it.
I will say that we're excited, not that Tableau is going to solve. It would be great if they solved all of our data problems, but like we are excited about tools or features coming out in 10.4. For example, like certified data sets, I think that came out in 10.4, so that gives us a little bit more flexibility to publish things to server. And rather than saying, hey, look at all of these random data sets and choose one and maybe it's good, we can at least have a little bit more, not authority, but guidance on look at this one. This one's certified by the Office of Institutional Research. Tools like Maestro look fun too.
I think we have time for one more.
The guy, green.
Yay.
And then so I think this is probably our last question because it's 3 o'clock, but we'll stick around to answer more questions if you want to come talk to us.
Thanks for coming and presenting. You talked a lot about really great technical suggestions and tips today, but for someone in a small university who doesn't have a dedicated team or buy-in from leadership initially like you did, where would you suggest that they start?
Start learning how to do some of those technical things. I would suggest starting on the Tableau website. Oh, to affect change. Where do you start if you want to affect change? I mean, for us, it was that proof of concept, We kind of stepped out of the realm of our traditional role and said, we're going to make something for the deans, which was received really weird.
I would say, like, where do you hear all the squeaky wheels? So just start talking to people who are making decisions around the university and think about, like, man, what are they saying? Like, what do I wish I knew? Like, I don't have this information right now. What information do I wish I had? and find a way to get that, even if it's just like manually typing into Excel to begin with, and like getting that data and throw it into a dashboard and show it to them. That is the quickest way I've ever seen people get buy-in. I mean, I'm not saying the quickest way is putting it into Excel, but like just find a way to get it into Tableau and get that out there to them. And like, I think one of the things Brendan was trying to say is that that POC isn't beautiful. Like that, those calculated fields aren't the best things in the world, right? They're not anything that we're gonna put into production. We're always gonna do that in the data source and the database first, but it's a matter of getting it out quick, fast, and getting people to buy into it first. Great, thank you guys.
Cool, thanks a bunch.